The scorching sun had barely risen over the eastern ridges when Katherine Clayton was dragged through Scottsbluff's dusty Main Street, her wrists bound with rough rope that bit into her skin, her face streaked with tears and dirt as the crowd shouted, "Hang the thief! Hang her!" The Nebraska Territory of 1867 had little mercy for those accused of stealing, especially a woman who had dared to settle alone on the fringes of civilization. Katherine kept her head high, despite the jeers. 23 years of life had taught her that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Her worn blue dress, once her Sunday best, was torn at the hem from being hauled across the rutted street toward the hastily constructed gallows erected outside the sheriff's office. "I didn't steal anything," she shouted, her voice lost among the angry voices of the mob that had gathered in the early morning light. The night before, Jeremiah Wilson's prized gold pocket watch had gone missing, along with $70 in cash, a fortune in these parts, and Katherine, who had cleaned his home twice weekly, was the immediate suspect. Sheriff Donovan gripped her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Save your breath, woman. 3 people saw you sneaking out of Wilson's place with a bulge in your apron." "That was the bread he gave me as payment," Katherine protested, desperately scanning the faces in the crowd for anyone who might believe her. But most looked away, their expressions hardening with judgment. At the edge of the gathered townsfolk stood Preston Larson, his tall frame leaning against a hitching post, blue eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his Stetson. Unlike the others, he watched the proceedings with a detached curiosity rather than bloodlust. Preston had arrived in Scottsbluff just 3 weeks prior, looking to purchase land for cattle after serving in the Union Army during the war. He'd noticed the accused woman around town, keeping to herself mostly, working hard at whatever job she could find. Something about this situation didn't sit right with him. "Stand her up on the platform," called Mayor Whitley, a portly man whose authority seemed to swell with the size of the angry crowd. "We'll show what happens to thieves in Scottsbluff." Preston pushed himself away from the post, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. He'd seen enough rushed justice during the war to know that mobs rarely sought truth. As Katherine was forced up the rickety wooden steps, he noticed something that the others had missed in their excitement: genuine terror in her eyes, not the shifty guilt of a caught thief. "Hold on there," Preston called out, his deep voice cutting through the noise as he stepped forward. The crowd parted reluctantly before him, perhaps sensing the dangerous calm in his stance. "Seems to me a trial might be in order before we start stringing up women in broad daylight." Sheriff Donovan scowled. "This isn't your concern, Cowboy. We handle our own justice in Scottsbluff." "Is that what you call this?" Preston replied, climbing the first step of the gallows. "Looks more like murder to me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Katherine stared at him, her green eyes wide with surprise and desperate hope. "Wilson's word is good enough for me," the sheriff insisted, tightening his grip on Katherine's arm until she winced. "He says she took it, and 3 witnesses back his claim." Preston removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair as he addressed the crowd. "Folks, I was at the Silver Dollar Saloon last night when Jeremiah Wilson was playing poker with some cattle drivers passing through. I saw him lose that gold watch and a heap more than $70 to a man from Kansas City who rode out before dawn." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, uncertain now. "That's a damned lie," shouted Wilson, pushing to the front of the gathering. His face was flushed with anger and something else Preston recognized, the fear of a man caught in his own deception. "She took it while I was sleeping." Preston stepped fully onto the platform now, positioning himself between Katherine and the noose. "Then you won't mind if we search your home, Wilson. If the lady took your valuables, they must be hidden somewhere." "I already looked," the sheriff said, though with less conviction. "Did you look in the loose floorboard under Wilson's bed?" "The one he uses to hide his gambling debts from his wife," Preston asked calmly, gambling on a hunch based on what he'd observed of the man's character. Wilson's face drained of color. "How dare you? Or perhaps we could ask the Kansas City man," Preston continued. "Though I suspect he's halfway to Fort Kearney by now, with your watch and money fair and square in his pocket. You invented this theft to explain to your wife why you're suddenly short of funds, didn't you, Wilson?" The crowd's mood was shifting. Several people looked at Wilson with new suspicion. "This is absurd," Wilson sputtered. "Are you going to take the word of some drifter over a respected businessman?" Mayor Whitley cleared his throat, suddenly aware that the political winds were changing. "Perhaps we should investigate further before proceeding with such permanent measures." Katherine's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Preston instinctively reached out to steady her, feeling her trembling through the thin fabric of her dress. "If I may suggest," Preston said, his voice reasonable but leaving no room for argument, "Miss Clayton should be released into someone's custody while the matter is properly investigated." "And I suppose you're volunteering?" the sheriff asked sarcastically. "I am." Preston met Katherine's startled gaze. "My ranch house has a spare room. She'll be secure there, and I give my word she won't flee." Katherine spoke for the first time since Preston had intervened. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I know an innocent person when I see one," he replied quietly. "And I've seen enough injustice to last a lifetime." After much debate and amid the crowd's diminishing enthusiasm for a hanging, the sheriff reluctantly agreed to release Katherine into Preston's custody, though not without warning him that he'd be held responsible if she disappeared. As Preston led her away from the gallows, Katherine kept her head down, avoiding the gazes of those who had been calling for her death minutes earlier. She was acutely aware of Preston's presence beside her, this stranger who had risked himself for her. "Thank you," she whispered as they reached his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. "But you shouldn't have involved yourself. They'll turn against you now." Preston helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "I've faced worse than small-town gossip, Miss Clayton." "Katherine," she corrected, feeling strangely comforted by his solid presence at her back. "My name is Katherine. Preston Larson," he replied, spurring his horse toward the outskirts of town. "And I believe you have a story to tell me once we're away from prying ears." As they rode away from Scottsbluff, Katherine couldn't stop the tears that finally came, tears of relief and lingering fear. Her life had hung by a thread, and this stranger, this cowboy, had cut her free with nothing but his words and his conviction that she was innocent. What she didn't know was whether she had truly escaped the noose or merely postponed the inevitable. The town wouldn't forget, and neither would Jeremiah Wilson. Preston's ranch lay 3 miles outside of town, a modest affair with a main house, a small barn and corral. He had purchased it just 2 weeks ago from a widow heading back east, and he was still settling in. As they approached, Katherine took in the sturdy log construction and the fresh white paint on the window frames. "It's not much," Preston said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment. "But it's secure, and no one will bother you here." "It's beautiful," Katherine replied honestly. After weeks of renting a tiny room above the dressmaker's shop in town, the prospect of space and quiet seemed like luxury. Preston helped her down from the horse, careful not to touch her more than necessary. Katherine was aware of how inappropriate this situation was, an unmarried woman staying at a bachelor's home, but given the alternative of a hangman's noose, she couldn't bring herself to care about propriety. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. Preston showed her to the smaller of the bedrooms. "You can rest here. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I'll see about some food." Katherine nodded gratefully, waiting until he closed the door before sinking onto the bed and finally giving in to the shaking that had threatened to overwhelm her since the moment the sheriff had dragged her from her room at dawn. She was alive, but her life in Scottsbluff was effectively over. No one would hire her now, and the accusations would follow her wherever she went in these parts. After washing her face and hands in the cool water, Katherine emerged to find Preston cooking at the iron stove. The domestic scene was so at odds with the man's dangerous competence at the gallows that she paused, taking in the sight of his broad shoulders as he worked. "You cook?" she asked, immediately regretting the foolish question. Preston glanced over his shoulder with a slight smile that softened his weathered features. "A man alone learns to fend for himself. It's just bacon and beans, I'm afraid. It smells wonderful." Katherine moved to the rough-hewn table, unsure of her place. "May I help? Sit," he instructed. "You've had enough excitement for one day." As they ate in awkward silence, Katherine studied her rescuer. Preston Larson was perhaps 30, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he had today. His hands were calloused from work, and a thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. He ate efficiently, a man accustomed to viewing food as fuel rather than pleasure. "Why did you really help me?" Katherine finally asked, setting down her fork. "The truth, please." Preston considered her for a long moment. "Truth is, I was watching when Wilson lost that watch. I knew he was lying, and I've seen too many innocent people suffer to stand by and watch another." "That doesn't explain why you brought me here to your home." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." Preston pushed his plate aside. "I need a housekeeper, Miss Clayton. Someone to cook proper meals and keep things in order while I focus on building my herd. The previous arrangement with you staying in town clearly won't work now. I'm offering you employment with room and board until this matter is settled or you decide where to go next." Katherine stared at him in disbelief. "You want to hire me after what just happened?" "Especially after what just happened. It proves you need the work and I need the help." His eyes met hers directly. Unless you have somewhere else to go, the brutal truth hung between them. She didn't. Katherine had arrived in Scottsbluff 3 months ago after her father's death left her with nothing but debts back in Pennsylvania. She had just enough money for a train ticket west and the desperate hope of making a new start where no one knew her name. "I don't," she admitted, "but your reputation will survive," he finished for her. "Besides, Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch comes by twice a week. Her presence should satisfy any concerns about impropriety." It was a practical solution to both their problems, yet Katherine hesitated. She had learned the hard way that offers that seemed too good to be true usually were. Why would you risk hiring someone the whole town believes is a thief? Preston's expression darkened. "This town is quick to judge and slow to forgive, but I'm not beholden to their opinions. I form my own." "And what opinion have you formed of me, Mr. Larson?" He studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "That you're a woman who's had to be stronger than most, who's carried burdens alone for too long, and who deserves a fair chance." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And that you probably make a better breakfast than I do." Despite everything, Katherine found herself smiling back. "That wouldn't be difficult." "Then we have an agreement." Preston extended his hand across the table. Katherine hesitated only briefly before placing her smaller hand in his. "We do. Thank you, Mr. Larson." "Preston," he corrected. "If we're to share a roof, we might as well use our given names." Katherine nodded, withdrawing her hand and feeling an unexpected warmth where he had touched her. Preston. The rest of the day passed in quiet activity. Preston showed Katherine around the property, explaining his plans to expand the small herd of cattle he'd purchased. She listened attentively, grateful for the normalcy after the morning's terror. By evening, Katherine had taken stock of the kitchen supplies and made a list of necessities. "I can ride into town tomorrow for provisions," Preston offered over a supper of salt pork and the last of the beans. "I should come with you," Katherine said, though the thought of facing the townspeople again made her stomach clench. "People will talk less if they see me working, not hiding." Preston shook his head. "Give it time. Let me speak with Sheriff Donovan first, see if he's found any evidence to clear your name." "He won't look," Katherine said bitterly. "He's never liked me, says women who travel alone bring trouble." "Then I'll look myself," Preston replied with quiet determination. "Wilson is lying, and lies leave traces." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with moonlight streaming through the curtainless window, Katherine found herself wondering about the man sleeping across the hall. What had shaped Preston Larson into someone who would stand between a stranger and a mob? What ghosts haunted him that he recognized innocence in her eyes when others saw only guilt? Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee. Katherine dressed quickly in her spare dress, smoothing her dark hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged, Preston was already at the stove, frying salt pork. "Good morning," he said, glancing up. "Hope the bed was comfortable enough." "More comfortable than the alternative," Katherine replied, moving to take over the cooking. "Let me do that. It's why I'm here, after all." Their fingers brushed as he handed over the spatula, and Katherine felt that same strange warmth from yesterday. She busied herself with breakfast, aware of Preston watching her for a moment before he moved away to pour coffee. Over breakfast, Preston outlined his plan. "I'll ride into town, speak with the sheriff, and do some asking around about Wilson's gambling habits. People talk in saloons, especially if encouraged by a few drinks." "Be careful," Katherine warned. "Wilson has influence in Scottsbluff. His brother-in-law owns the bank." Preston's mouth quirked. "I've dealt with worse than small-town bankers." After he left, Katherine threw herself into work, grateful for the distraction. She scrubbed the kitchen until the wooden counters gleamed, swept years of dust from corners, and aired out bedding in the Nebraska sunshine. Physical labor helped quiet her mind, pushing away thoughts of how close she had come to death, and what might still await her if Preston couldn't find evidence of Wilson's lies. By mid-afternoon, she had the house in better order than it had likely been in years. Exhausted but satisfied, Katherine was hanging the last of the laundered curtains when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief washed over her at the sight of Preston returning safely, followed immediately by concern when she saw the grim set of his mouth. "What happened?" she asked as soon as he dismounted. Preston handed her a small paper-wrapped package. "Sugar and coffee, and information, though not the kind I hoped for." Inside, he removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Wilson's doubled down on his accusation. He's telling anyone who'll listen that I'm harboring a thief because I'm involved with you." Katherine's cheeks burned. "That's ridiculous. We barely knew each other before yesterday." "Truth doesn't matter to men like Wilson when their pride is wounded," Preston said, pouring himself a cup of water from the pitcher. "He's managed to convince the sheriff to issue a warrant for your arrest. They'll be coming for you tomorrow." The room seemed to spin around Katherine. "Then it was all for nothing. Your help taking me in." "No," Preston said firmly. "It bought us time, and I've learned something useful. Wilson's been in deep financial trouble for months. His store is mortgaged to the hilt, and he's been borrowing from his brother-in-law to cover gambling debts. How does that help me? It gives him motive to invent a theft, and I found something else. Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small slip of paper. This was posted on the saloon wall. A Kansas City gambler named Thorne won a high-stakes poker game 2 nights ago and left town immediately after. Katherine took the paper, reading the crude description of a professional gambler who had fleeced several local men. This still doesn't prove Wilson lost his watch and money to this man. No, but the bartender at the Silver Dollar confirmed Wilson was playing at that table and left looking like he'd seen a ghost. Preston's expression hardened. We need to find Thorne. How? He could be anywhere by now. There are only so many places a gambler heads after a big win. Fort Kearney or North Platte, most likely. I'm riding out at first light to find him. Katherine stared at him in shock. You would do that for me? Track down a stranger on nothing but a hunch? Preston met her gaze steadily. It's more than a hunch. It's the truth, and we both know it. Why? Katherine whispered. Why risk so much for someone you barely know? Something flickered in Preston's eyes, a vulnerability at odds with his confident demeanor. Because I know what it's like to be judged and found guilty without a fair hearing, and because he hesitated. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. The simple honesty of his words stole Katherine's breath. No man had ever seen her as worth fighting for, not her father, who had gambled away their security, not the fiancé who had abandoned her when her father's debts came to light. Yet this near stranger was willing to risk everything on her behalf. If you leave, they'll come for me while you're gone, she said quietly. Not if you come with me. Preston's suggestion hung in the air between them. We'll leave before dawn, follow Thorne's trail together. It's your name we're trying to clear. You deserve to be part of it. People will say I've run, that I'm guilty. People will talk regardless. The question is whether you want to sit here waiting for the sheriff or take action to prove your innocence. Katherine considered his words, weighing the risks against the certainty of arrest if she stayed. When do we leave? 4 o'clock. Pack light, only what you can carry on horseback. That night, Katherine barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead and what awaited if they failed to find Thorne. She was putting her trust in a man she had known for 2 days, riding away from civilization into the wilds of the Nebraska Territory. It was madness by any rational measure, yet remaining in Scottsbluff meant certain ruin. In the darkest hours before dawn, Katherine gathered her few possessions: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the small daguerreotype of her parents that was her only family heirloom. Everything else she had to leave behind. Preston was already in the main room when she emerged, looking grim but determined in the lamplight. He had laid out journey bread, jerky, and coffee on the table. Eat, he instructed. We've got hard riding ahead. They ate in silence, the weight of the decision hanging over them. When they finished, Preston handed Katherine a small revolver. You know how to use this, she took it gingerly. My father taught me, but I've never had cause to fire at anything but targets. Pray you don't need to now, he said, but keep it with you. The trail can be dangerous. Outside, the pre-dawn air was crisp, the sky still dotted with fading stars. Preston had saddled 2 horses, his buckskin and a smaller bay mare. Mrs. Peterson's horse, he explained when Katherine looked questioningly at him. I'll send payment and explanation once we're clear. She's a good woman. She'll understand. As they mounted up, Katherine cast one last look at the ranch house that had briefly been her sanctuary. I'm sorry to cost you your home. Preston followed her gaze. It's just a house. I can build another. They rode out as the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, keeping to the less traveled trails that wound through the hills surrounding Scottsbluff. Preston set a brisk pace, clearly intending to put as much distance as possible between them and the town before their absence was discovered. By mid-morning, they had covered significant ground, stopping only briefly to rest the horses near a small creek. Katherine slid from the saddle, her legs stiff and aching from the unaccustomed hours of riding. "How far to Fort Kearney?" she asked, splashing cold water on her face. "3 days' ride if the weather holds," Preston replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "But Thorne might have stopped in smaller settlements along the way. We'll need to ask questions." "Questions that might alert the sheriff to our direction," Katherine noted. Preston nodded grimly. "It's a risk we'll have to take. Sheriff Donovan isn't known for his tracking skills, but he's stubborn. He'll follow if he can." They continued eastward through rolling grasslands, the vast open spaces of the Nebraska Territory stretching around them. Katherine had never ventured this far from town, and despite their circumstances, she couldn't help but be awed by the beauty of the untamed landscape. "It's magnificent," she said softly when they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley where a herd of antelope grazed. Preston glanced at her, something softening in his expression. "It is. That's why I came west after the war. Wanted space to breathe, room to build something of my own." "You fought for the Union?" Katherine asked, realizing how little she knew about this man who had risked so much for her. 4 years. Joined up in '61 out of Pennsylvania. Saw things no man should see." A shadow crossed his face. "Came west to forget most of it." "My father wanted to enlist," Katherine said, "but his lungs were weak. He stayed home, gambling away what little we had while other men fought and died." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Is that why you came west? To escape his debts?" Katherine nodded. "After he died, there was nothing left. The creditors would have taken everything, including my mother's silver hairbrush. So I sold what I could, bought a ticket west, and hoped for a fresh start." She laughed humorlessly. "Some fresh start." Preston studied her for a long moment. "You're stronger than you know, Katherine Clayton. Most women wouldn't have had the courage to start over alone." His words warmed something in her that had been cold for too long. "Thank you for seeing that, for seeing me." They rode on, the sun climbing high overhead. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering to the west and Preston frowned at the sky. "Storm's coming. We need to find shelter before it hits." An hour later, the first fat raindrops began to fall as they approached a small, deserted homestead little more than a sod house and collapsing barn, long abandoned by settlers who had found the Nebraska soil less hospitable than promised. "It's not much, but it'll keep us dry," Preston said, leading the way to the barn, which was in better condition than the house. Inside, they unsaddled the horses and rubbed them down while the rain began to drum steadily on the roof. The barn smelled of old hay and earth, but it was dry and sheltered from the strengthening wind. Preston built a small fire near the doorway where the smoke could escape, careful to keep it away from the dry hay. Katherine unpacked their meager provisions, setting out jerky and hard biscuits for their evening meal. As darkness fell outside, the storm intensified, lightning occasionally illuminating the interior of the barn in harsh flashes. They sat close to the fire, its warmth a welcome comfort against the chill that had settled in with the rain. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," Preston said suddenly. "What was your life like before?" Katherine was surprised by his interest, but found herself speaking of her childhood in Harrisburg, of a mother who died too young and a father who retreated into gambling and drink. She told him of her brief engagement to the banker's son who had abandoned her when her father's debts came to light. and of her desperate journey west in search of a place where her name carried no shame. And now here I am, accused of theft and fleeing with a man I barely know, she concluded with a sad smile. Perhaps I'm not meant for respectability after all. Respectability is overrated, Preston replied, poking at the fire. I've known plenty of respectable men who were rotten to the core and outcasts with more honor than any gentleman. And which are you? Katherine asked, studying his profile in the flickering light. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Neither, I expect. Just a man trying to do what's right when he sees it needs doing. Like rescuing accused thieves from angry mobs, especially that. His eyes met hers across the fire, and Katherine felt that strange warmth spread through her again, stronger this time. There was something in the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with a kind of recognition, as if he saw beyond her circumstances to something essential within her. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then lightning cracked nearby, startling them both. Preston cleared his throat and stood. We should get some rest. Long ride tomorrow. He arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety even in these improper circumstances. Katherine lay down, listening to the rain and thunder, acutely aware of Preston's presence a few feet away. Despite the danger of their situation and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt oddly at peace. For the first time since arriving in Scottsbluff, she wasn't alone. Morning came with clearing skies and the sweet smell of rain-washed earth. They broke camp quickly, eager to make up time lost to the storm. As they rode east, the land gradually changed from open prairie to more densely wooded areas along the Platte River. By midday, they reached a small trading post where a few rough-looking men lounged outside, eyeing them with suspicious curiosity as they approached. Katherine felt their gazes lingering on her and moved her horse closer to Preston's. "Let me do the talking," Preston murmured as they dismounted. These aren't the type to warm to strangers, especially a woman traveling with just one man. Inside the trading post, a bearded man with one eye regarded them impassively from behind a crude counter. "Water for the horses and whatever food you can spare," Preston said, placing coins on the counter. "We're looking for a man named Thorne, professional gambler, passed this way from Scottsbluff a few days back." The shopkeeper's expression didn't change, but Katherine noticed his good eye flick briefly to a corner where a man in a threadbare suit was nursing a drink. Preston noticed too. "Much obliged," he said, collecting the supplies the shopkeeper silently pushed toward him. He guided Katherine to a table near the man in the corner, positioning himself so he could watch both the stranger and the door. Passing through, the suited man asked after they had sat in silence for several minutes. "Heading to Fort Kearney," Preston replied casually. "Heard there might be work there," the man snorted. "Not unless you're looking to gamble or sell whiskey to soldiers or other services." His eyes slid to Katherine, who stiffened. Preston's hand moved casually to rest near his holstered gun. "Just honest work is all. Honest work." The man laughed humorlessly. "You're in the wrong territory for that, friend. Out here, a man makes his fortune by his wits or his gun." He leaned forward. "Speaking of fortunes, there was a fellow came through 2 days ago, flashing money and a gold watch like he owned the world. Cleaned out 3 soldiers at poker before moving on." Katherine's heart raced. This had to be Thorne. "Sounds like a man who knows his business," Preston said carefully. "Where might he be headed?" Said something about North Platte having better games. The man smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Though I wouldn't recommend following him unless you're willing to lose that pretty little mare outside. He's not the type to leave a man with carfare home." Preston nodded his thanks and stood, guiding Katherine out with a hand at the small of her back. Outside, he helped her mount quickly. "North Platte," he said quietly as they rode away. "That's a day's ride northeast of here." Katherine glanced back at the trading post, where the men were still watching them. "Do you think they'll remember us if the sheriff comes asking?" "Undoubtedly. But they'll remember any two people traveling together. At least now we have a direction." They pushed on, riding hard through the afternoon. Katherine found herself watching Preston, the confident way he sat his horse, the alertness in his eyes as they scanned the trail ahead, the gentle way he treated both animals and her. He was nothing like the men she had known before, men who saw women as decorations or burdens. Preston treated her as an equal partner in this journey, valuing her opinions and respecting her strength. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a stream. The evening routine was becoming familiar, Preston tending the horses while Katherine prepared their simple meal, then sitting together by the fire as night settled around them. "Tell me about your plans," Katherine said as they ate. "Before all this, what did you hope to build in Scottsbluff?" Preston stared into the fire. "A cattle operation eventually. Start small, build slowly. I've been saving since the war ended, working ranch jobs from Texas to Montana." He shrugged. "Nothing fancy, just something that was mine that I built with my own hands. And now we clear your name first. Then." He looked up at her. "The West is big. There's room to start over anywhere." The implication hung between them that whatever happened, returning to Scottsbluff might not be possible for either of them. They had crossed a line by fleeing together, regardless of the justice of their cause. "I've cost you everything," Katherine said softly. "Your ranch, your reputation, you've cost me nothing I wasn't willing to give," Preston interrupted. "A man makes his choices and lives with them. I chose to help you because it was right, and I'd do it again." Katherine studied him across the fire, this enigmatic man who had become her protector and companion. "Why did you really help me, Preston? The whole truth this time?" He was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with emotion. "During the war, I saw a young soldier executed for stealing food. He was innocent. The real thief was a lieutenant who'd been selling rations on the black market. I knew it, but I didn't speak up in time." His eyes, when they met hers, were haunted. "I swore I'd never stand by again when an innocent person was condemned." Katherine moved around the fire to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Then you've honored that promise. Whatever happens, remember that." Preston's fingers tightened around hers. For a long moment they sat in silence, the warmth of their joined hands more comforting than the fire before them. Then, almost imperceptibly, Preston leaned closer, and Katherine found herself drawn toward him as if by some invisible force. His lips met hers gently, a question more than a demand. Katherine answered by pressing closer, her free hand rising to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and fear melting away in the warmth of this unexpected connection. When they finally broke apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I shouldn't have done that." "I wanted you to," Katherine whispered. "I've wanted you to since that first day, when you stood between me and death without even knowing my name." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with tender care. "Katherine." Whatever he might have said was lost as a twig snapped loudly in the darkness beyond their camp. Preston was on his feet instantly, gun drawn as he positioned himself between Katherine and the potential threat. "Who's there?" he called, voice hard. "Show yourself." "Easy, cowboy," came a drawling voice as a figure emerged into the firelight. "Just a fellow traveler looking for company." These woods can get mighty lonely at night. The man who stepped into the circle of light was tall and lean, dressed in a black coat that had seen better days. His face was clean-shaven but weather-beaten, his eyes sharp with intelligence and wariness. "You're following a dangerous trail, sneaking up on armed folks after dark," Preston said, his gun still raised. The stranger raised his hands in a placating gesture. "No harm intended. Saw your fire from the ridge and thought to share news of the trail ahead. Name's Cooper." Katherine rose slowly, studying the newcomer. Something about him seemed oddly familiar, though she was certain they had never met. "What news?" Preston asked, not lowering his weapon. Cooper smiled thinly. "Word is the sheriff from Scottsbluff is 2 hours behind you with 3 deputies, asking after a woman accused of theft and the man who helped her escape justice." Katherine's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "Passed them on the road earlier today. They're making good time." Cooper's eyes flicked between them. "They've got a poster with both your likenesses. Quite the reward for information leading to your capture." Preston's jaw tightened. "And yet you're here telling us this instead of collecting that reward. Why?" Cooper shrugged. "Let's just say I've no love for Sheriff Donovan or his particular brand of justice. Thought you might appreciate the warning." "We do," Katherine said quickly, before Preston could respond. "Thank you." Cooper nodded, backing toward the darkness. "I'd ride north before dawn if I were you." "Cross the Platte at Miller's Ford. The water's low enough this time of year. Sheriff's not likely to follow immediately. He's afraid of water." With that cryptic advice, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Katherine and Preston staring after him. "Can we trust him?" Katherine asked once she was certain Cooper was gone. Preston holstered his gun slowly. "I don't know, but if Donovan is that close, we can't stay here regardless." They doused the fire and packed quickly, riding north through the darkness with only the stars to guide them. The encounter with Cooper had shattered the intimacy of their earlier moment, replacing it with renewed urgency and fear. After several hours of difficult night riding, they reached the Platte River just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Miller's Ford was as Cooper had described, a wide, shallow crossing marked by a stand of ancient cottonwoods on the northern bank. They urged their tired horses into the cool water, which rose only to the animals' knees at its deepest point. On the far side, they paused to let the horses drink before continuing north. "North Platte is still northeast of here," Preston said, consulting a small map he carried. "But we've added at least half a day to our journey by this detour." "If it keeps the sheriff from catching us, it's worth it," Katherine replied, shivering slightly in the dawn chill. "Do you think that man Cooper was telling the truth?" Preston frowned. "About the sheriff, probably. About his own motives, I'm less certain." He folded the map and tucked it away. "We should keep moving. Find somewhere more secluded to rest during the day, then ride for North Platte tonight." They traveled for another hour before finding a suitable campsite in a dense thicket of trees and undergrowth that would hide them from any pursuers. Both were exhausted from the night's hard ride, and they set up camp in near silence. "You should sleep first," Preston said, checking his revolver. "I'll keep watch." Katherine was too tired to argue. She lay down on her bedroll, watching through half-closed eyes as Preston positioned himself where he could see the approach to their hiding place. Despite the danger and uncertainty that surrounded them, she felt safe in his presence. The memory of their kiss by the firelight followed her into dreams. She woke to Preston gently shaking her shoulder. The sun was high overhead, filtering through the leaves above them. "Your turn to rest," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "I'll fix something to eat first." Katherine sat up, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "You look exhausted. Sleep now, I'll wake you if I hear anything." Preston hesitated, then nodded, lying down where she had been. Within moments, his breathing deepened as exhaustion claimed him. Katherine watched him sleep, struck by how vulnerable he looked in repose. The hard lines of his face softened, making him appear younger. On impulse, she reached out to brush a lock of sandy hair from his forehead, then drew back, surprised by her own boldness. The day passed slowly. Katherine kept vigilant watch, starting at every snapping twig or bird call. By late afternoon, Preston woke, looking more rested though still wary. They ate a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits, conserving their supplies. As the sun began its descent, they prepared to move on, packing efficiently in the comfortable rhythm they had developed over their days together. "Katherine," Preston said suddenly, as she was tightening her horse's girth strap, "if we find Thorn and clear your name." She looked up, catching the uncertainty in his expression. "Yes. What then? Will you go back to Scottsbluff?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Katherine considered it carefully before answering. "I don't think I can. Even if we prove Wilson lied, people will remember the accusation more than the truth." She met his gaze steadily. "And you, would you go back?" Preston shook his head. "No, that life is behind me now." He stepped closer, taking her hand. "Katherine, I know this is sudden, and our circumstances are hardly ideal, but when this is over—" He drew a deep breath. "I'd like you to consider a future with me, wherever that might be." Katherine's heart raced at the sincerity in his eyes. "Preston," the sound of approaching horses cut her off. Preston immediately pushed her behind him, drawing his gun. "Get to your horse," he whispered urgently. "If it's the sheriff, ride east as hard as you can. I'll hold them off." "I won't leave you," Katherine protested. "You must. Finding Thorn is what matters now." Before Katherine could argue further, a familiar voice called out. "Larson, Clayton, it's Cooper. I'm coming in alone." Preston kept his gun raised as Cooper rode into their camp, looking dusty but unharmed. "You're a hard pair to track," Cooper said, dismounting. "Fortunate I found you before someone else did." "Why are you following us?" Preston demanded. Cooper held up his hands. "I've got information you need, about Thorn and about Wilson's watch." Katherine stepped forward. "What about them?" "Thorn's in North Platte, all right, staying at the Golden Eagle Saloon, and he's still got Wilson's watch, been flashing it around town, bragging about how he won it from a fool merchant in Scottsbluff." Cooper smiled grimly. "Thought you might want to know before you rode into town half-cocked." Preston lowered his gun slightly. "How do you know this?" "I have my sources," Cooper said evasively. "Let's just say I keep track of certain professional gamblers for personal reasons." Katherine studied the man more closely. There was something in his manner, in the way he held himself, that reminded her of someone. Then it struck her. "You're a Pinkerton," she said softly. "Aren't you?" Cooper's expression didn't change, but a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. "What makes you say that, Miss Clayton?" "My father once had dealings with a Pinkerton detective. You have the same watchful way about you." She tilted her head. "Why would a Pinkerton agent be interested in us?" Cooper sighed, dropping his casual demeanor. "I've been tracking Thorn for 3 months. He's wanted in Chicago for swindling a banker's widow out of her life savings. When I heard about the commotion in Scottsbluff, a woman accused of stealing a watch and money that Thorn had likely won, I got curious." Preston holstered his gun slowly. "So you're not working with Sheriff Donovan?" "Hardly. The man's a fool and corrupt besides." Cooper's expression hardened. "But he is still following you, and he's closer than you'd like. We need to move fast if we're going to catch Thorn before he moves on again." The "we" wasn't lost on either Preston or Katherine. They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Why help us?" Preston asked. "Your job is to catch Thorn, not clear Katherine's name. Let's just say I don't like seeing innocent people hounded by the law. Cooper mounted his horse again. North Platte's 4 hours ride from here. If we leave now, we can be there by midnight. Thorne usually plays late into the night. After a moment's hesitation, Preston nodded. Lead the way. But understand this, if you're playing us false, you'll answer to me. Cooper tipped his hat. Wouldn't expect anything less. They rode hard through the gathering dusk, Cooper setting a pace that pushed their tired horses to their limits. Katherine's thoughts raced faster than the landscape blurring past them. If Cooper was telling the truth, if they could find Thorne with Wilson's watch, her name could be cleared. But even then, could she ever return to Scottsbluff? Did she want to? Her gaze kept straying to Preston, riding tall and determined beside her. In the few days they had known each other, he had become more important to her than anyone had been in years. The future he had hinted at, a future together, beckoned like a distant light. North Platte appeared as a cluster of yellow lights in the valley below them shortly before midnight. The town was larger than Scottsbluff, with more substantial buildings and a proper main street lined with businesses. Despite the late hour, several saloons blazed with light and activity. The Golden Eagle is at the end of the main street, Cooper said as they approached the town's outskirts. I'll go in first, make sure Thorne's still there. You two wait 10 minutes, then follow, and Larson, leave your gun with your horse. The Eagle has a no-weapons policy. Preston frowned but nodded. They watched Cooper ride ahead, then dismounted to give their horses a brief rest before the final approach to town. Alone for a moment, Preston turned to Katherine. Whatever happens in there, stay close to me. These saloon crowds can get rough, especially late at night. I will, she promised, then impulsively reached up to touch his face. Preston, about what you said earlier, about a future together. He covered her hand with his own. I meant it. I know it's fast and maybe foolish given our circumstances, but these past days with you. He struggled to find the words. I've never met anyone like you, Katherine. Your courage, your strength, you've faced losing everything with more dignity than most men I've known. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. I never thought I'd find someone who would stand by me, much less fight for me. My father taught me early that I could only rely on myself. You can rely on me, Preston said, his voice low and fierce. Whatever happens tonight, whatever comes after, I'll be there, if you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Katherine rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. When they broke apart, words seemed unnecessary. The Golden Eagle saloon was crowded and smoky, the air thick with the smells of whiskey, sweat, and cheap perfume. Katherine kept close to Preston as they entered, conscious of the stares that followed her. Women were rare in such establishments, especially women who weren't working girls. Cooper was at the bar, nursing a drink. He caught their eye and subtly nodded toward a corner table where a well-dressed man was dealing cards to 3 cowboys. The gold watch chain glinting across his vest was visible even from across the room. That's him, Preston murmured. Thorne. They made their way to the bar, positioning themselves where they could watch the game while appearing to be ordinary customers. Cooper joined them, speaking quietly. He's been winning steadily all night. The locals are getting restless. He's too good, and they know it. Wait for the right moment before approaching him. Katherine studied Thorne from a distance. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with elegant hands that moved with practiced precision as he dealt cards. The watch, Jeremiah Wilson's watch, was prominently displayed, clearly a point of pride. How do we get him to admit where he got the watch? She whispered. Leave that to me, Cooper said. When I give the signal, come over as if you're interested in joining the game. They watched as Cooper sauntered over to Thorne's table, speaking casually to the players. After a few minutes of banter, Cooper looked back and nodded slightly. Preston took Catherine's arm. "Ready, as I'll ever be." They approached the table where Cooper was now seated as a player. Thorne looked up at their approach, his eyes lingering appreciatively on Katherine before shifting to assess Preston. "Room for two more?" Preston asked, his voice friendly but firm. Thorne smiled, revealing even white teeth. "Always room for a pretty lady and her escort." Pull-up chairs were playing five-card draw, gentlemen's rules. As they sat, Catherine's gaze fixed on the gold watch. Thorne noticed her interest and smiled wider. "Admiring my timepiece, miss. A recent acquisition and a particular favorite." "It's beautiful," Katherine said truthfully. "May I ask where you got it?" Thorne chuckled. "Won it fair and square from a merchant who thought he knew more about cards than he did." "Scott's Bluff, wasn't it, Cooper?" Cooper nodded, laying down his cards. "That's what you said earlier. Merchant named Wilson, if I recall correctly." Katherine and Preston exchanged glances. Thorne had just confirmed everything they needed to hear. "Jeremiah Wilson?" Preston asked casually. "Short fellow, owns the general store." "That's the one," Thorne said, dealing a new hand. "Terrible poker face. Kept betting even when he was clearly outmatched. Lost this watch and a tidy sum before the night was through." "Interesting," Preston said. "Because Wilson's telling a different story back in Scottsbluff. Says the watch was stolen by this lady here." Thorne's hand stilled, his eyes narrowing as he looked more closely at Katherine. "Is that so?" "It is," Katherine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've been accused of theft and a mob nearly hanged me for it." A flash of something perhaps genuine surprise crossed Thorne's face. "That's unfortunate, but hardly my concern. I won this watch legitimately." "Would you be willing to state that before a judge?" Cooper asked, his tone suddenly authoritative. "Because I have reason to believe you're not just a gambler, Mr. Thorne. You're a confidence man wanted in 3 states. Thorne's expression hardened. "And who might you be to make such accusations?" Cooper removed a badge from his coat. "Nathaniel Cooper, Pinkerton Detective Agency. I've been tracking you since Chicago, Mr. Thorne." The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. The other players drew back, wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. Thorne's hand moved toward his coat, but Cooper was faster, producing a small derringer that had somehow escaped the saloon's no-weapons policy. "I wouldn't," Cooper warned quietly. "Now about that watch. I believe these folks need your testimony to clear the lady's name. A small statement from you might go a long way toward mitigating your own situation." Thorne's eyes darted between Cooper's gun, Preston's determined face, and Catherine's steady gaze. Finally, he sighed. "What exactly do you want from me?" "A signed statement that you won the watch and money from Jeremiah Wilson in a poker game," Preston said. "Witnessed by the bartender and anyone else who was present that night." Thorne considered this, clearly weighing his options. "And if I provide this statement, what then?" "Then Miss Clayton's name is cleared," Cooper said. "As for you and me, we still have other matters to settle, but I'm not unreasonable. Cooperation now might make things easier later." After a tense moment, Thorne nodded. "Very well, I have paper in my room. Shall we continue this discussion somewhere more private?" Cooper escorted Thorne upstairs to retrieve paper and pen, leaving Preston and Katherine at the table. The other players had discreetly moved away, sensing trouble. "You think he'll really help?" Katherine whispered, hardly daring to hope. Preston took her hand under the table. "He doesn't have much choice with Cooper holding that badge over him, and the truth is on our side. He did win that watch from Wilson." When Thorne and Cooper returned, Thorne was carrying paper and ink. With obvious reluctance but surprising eloquence, he wrote out a statement detailing how he had won Jeremiah Wilson's gold watch, and $78 in a poker game at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Scottsbluff, 2 nights before Katherine Clayton was accused of stealing the same items. The bartender was called over to witness the statement, along with 2 other men who had been present at the original game. All signed, making the document as official as possible under the circumstances. "Satisfied?" Thorne asked, pushing the paper toward Katherine. She took it with trembling hands, reading the words that could clear her name. "Yes, thank you. Don't thank me," Thorne said dryly. "Thank your persistent friends here. I've never met a woman worth this much trouble." Preston's grip tightened on Katherine's hand. "She is." Cooper folded the statement carefully and handed it to Katherine. "You should keep this safe. It's your proof of innocence." "What happens now?" she asked, tucking the paper securely into her bodice. "Now," Cooper said, "I take Mr. Thorne to face justice for his other activities. And you too." He glanced between Preston and Katherine. "Well, that's entirely up to you." Outside the saloon, as Cooper prepared to depart with his prisoner, Preston pulled the detective aside. "We owe you a debt we can't repay," Preston said, extending his hand. "If you ever need anything." Cooper shook his hand firmly. "Just doing my job, though I admit, helping an innocent woman clear her name makes this particular arrest more satisfying than most." He glanced at Katherine, who was securing their statement in her saddlebag. "Take care of her, Larson. She's stronger than she knows." "I'm well aware," Preston replied with a smile. "Good luck with your prisoner." As Cooper rode away with Thorne in tow, Katherine and Preston found themselves alone on the quiet street, the future suddenly wide open before them. "We should find a place to stay for the night," Preston said, looking up at the star-filled sky. "It's too late to start back now." Katherine hesitated. "Back where? To Scottsbluff? Is that what you want, now that we have proof of your innocence?" She thought about it, about the town that had been so quick to condemn her, about the life she had tried to build there. "No," she said finally. "I don't think I do. Even with this proof, there will always be those who remember the accusation more than the truth." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we go somewhere new, start fresh." "Together?" Katherine asked, the question holding all her hopes and fears. In answer, Preston drew her into his arms, uncaring of who might see them on the quiet street. "Together," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "If you'll have me, Katherine Clayton, I'd like to build that future I spoke of with you by my side." Katherine looked up at him, this man who had risked everything for her, who had seen her worth when others saw only suspicion. In his eyes, she found the answer to questions she had carried all her life about belonging, about trust, about love. "Yes," she whispered, rising on her toes to meet his kiss. "Yes, I'll have you, Preston Larson, wherever the trail leads." Their kiss sealed a promise more binding than any formal vow, a promise born of shared danger and growing love. A bond forged in the crucible of injustice and redeemed by truth. Morning found them on the trail again, but this time riding west rather than east, toward the distant mountains where Colorado Territory beckoned with the promise of new beginnings. They had spent the night in separate rooms at North Platte's small hotel, maintaining proprieties despite the depth of their feelings. There would be time for more once they were properly wed, a step both agreed should come before they settled anywhere new. "I was thinking," Preston said as they rode side by side through rolling grasslands, "about that valley we passed 2 days ago, the one with the stream running through it." "It was beautiful," Katherine agreed. "What about it? It would make good grazing land." "Better than what I had in Scottsbluff, and it's far enough from any town that we wouldn't have to worry about old stories following us." Katherine smiled, understanding what he was suggesting. "Are you proposing we build your cattle ranch there?" "Our cattle ranch," Preston corrected. "If you'd be amenable to such a life. It's not easy, especially for a woman. I'm not afraid of hard work, Katherine said, thinking of all she had endured to come this far. And I'd rather face difficulties with you than comforts with anyone else. The look Preston gave her was worth all the trials they had faced. Then that's where we'll make our home, build something lasting together. They rode on, hope rising with the sun at their backs. Katherine felt lighter than she had in years. The burden of accusations and loneliness lifted from her shoulders. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility, and beside her rode the man who had seen truth when others saw only judgment, who had stood between her and a mob with nothing but his conviction that she deserved better. 3 weeks later, in a small church in Denver, Katherine Clayton became Katherine Larson, with a traveling preacher officiating and 2 strangers as witnesses. Her wedding dress was simple, the best she could find on short notice, but Preston looked at her as if she were wearing the finest silk from Paris. "You're sure about this?" he asked one last time before they spoke their vows. "About me, about the life we'll build." Katherine's answer was as certain as the love that had grown between them on the trail from Scottsbluff to North Platte and beyond. "I've never been more sure of anything." With the gold band Preston placed on her finger, purchased with money he had saved for his cattle, Katherine gained not just a husband, but a future she had stopped believing possible. One built on trust, mutual respect, and a love that had begun in the shadow of a gallows but would flourish in the sunshine of truth. They settled in the valley Preston had remembered, building first a small cabin and gradually expanding both their home and their herd as the years passed. Word of their story spread through the territories, the woman falsely accused of theft and the cowboy who had stood between her and the mob, but by then, they were established enough that gossip held no power over them. Occasionally news reached them from Scottsbluff. Jeremiah Wilson had eventually been exposed for other frauds and had fled town in disgrace. Sheriff Donovan had lost his position after one too many instances of selective justice. These tales satisfied their sense of rightness, but they no longer defined Katherine and Preston's lives. 5 years after they had fled Scottsbluff together, as they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house watching their 3-year-old son Thomas playing with the new puppy, a rider approached their property. Katherine tensed momentarily, old fears never quite forgotten, but Preston squeezed her hand reassuringly. The rider turned out to be Nathaniel Cooper, still working for the Pinkertons but grayer at the temples than when they had last seen him. "Thought I might find you folks out this way," he said, accepting the coffee Katherine offered. "Happened to be passing through on a case and remembered that description of a valley you were so taken with." "We're glad you found us," Preston said, genuinely pleased to see the man who had helped clear Katherine's name. "How did things turn out with Thorne?" Cooper smiled grimly. 15 years in Illinois State Prison. He won't be swindling any more widows or winning any more watches for a good long while." Katherine bounced young Thomas on her knee. "We owe you our happiness, Mr. Cooper. Without your help that night in North Platte, you'd have found another way," Cooper said confidently. "You two struck me as the type who make their own luck." He glanced around at their prosperous homestead. "Seems I was right." After Cooper had gone, continuing on whatever mysterious Pinkerton business had brought him to their area, Katherine and Preston remained on the porch as evening painted the valley in gold and purple. Thomas had been put to bed, and a peaceful quiet settled over their home. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked softly. "Leaving everything behind for me." Preston drew her close against his side, his arm warm and secure around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment. Everything I truly needed I brought with me." He kissed her temple gently. "Or rather, she rode beside me all the way here." Katherine smiled, leaning into his embrace. From accused thief to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been neither simple nor easy. But as the stars began to appear above their valley and the man she loved held her close, Katherine knew that the difficult trail had led exactly where she was meant to be home. In the years that followed, the Larson Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. They added 2 more children to their family, daughter Eleanor and son James, and built a legacy of honesty and hard work that became known throughout the territory. And if sometimes, on quiet nights, Katherine still woke trembling from dreams of angry mobs and a hangman's noose, Preston was always there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was exactly where she belonged with the man who had seen the truth and stood between her and the world when it mattered most.